Imagine surviving one of the most destructive events in human history. Now, imagine it happening again just 3 days later. It sounds impossible, but for one man, it was terrifyingly real. He was either the luckiest man on Earth for surviving 2 atomic bombs, or the unluckiest for having to face them in the first place. This is the unbelievable story of Tsutomu Yamaguchi. In the summer of 1945, World War II was entering its final brutal chapter. But for 29-year-old Tsutomu Yamaguchi, his world revolved around 2 things: his work and his family. He was a talented marine engineer for Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, designing the oil tankers vital to Japan's war effort. He lived in the port city of Nagasaki with his wife Hisako and their baby boy Katsutoshi. But that summer, he wasn't home. He was on a 3-month business trip in another city, a place called Hiroshima. And August 6th was supposed to be his last day there. Yamaguchi and his 2 colleagues, Akira Iwanaga and Kuniyoshi Sato, were done. Their assignment for Mitsubishi was finished, and they were packed and ready to head home. All that was left was a quick trip to the shipyard to sort out some last-minute paperwork before they could finally catch a train back to their families in Nagasaki. On the morning of August 6th, under a clear blue sky, Yamaguchi was walking toward the shipyards, just under 2 miles from the city center. It was a perfectly normal morning, right up until the moment it was shattered by an event that would forever change our understanding of destruction. At 8:15 a.m., he looked up and saw a single American B-29 bomber. He watched as it dropped a small object on a parachute. And then, in a silent, blinding flash, the world tore itself apart. Yamaguchi later called it a great flash in the sky. A light so brilliant it was like staring into the core of the sun. In an instant, the force of the blast lifted him off his feet and hurled him through the air. The explosion ruptured his eardrums, flash burned his skin, and temporarily blinded him. Acting purely on instinct, he dove into a nearby irrigation ditch, covering his eyes and ears. A split-second move that almost certainly saved his life. When he finally pulled himself to his feet, the city he recognized was simply gone. In its place, a monstrous mushroom-shaped cloud of fire and ash climbed into the sky. His hair was scorched away, and the entire left side of his body was a canvas of raw, weeping burns. The city was a vision of hell. Fires raged out of control, buildings were flattened for miles, and the air was thick with radioactive dust. Incredibly, Yamaguchi managed to find his 2 colleagues, who had also survived. The 3 of them spent a horrifying night in an air raid shelter, surrounded by the dead and dying, before picking their way through the ruins to a train station. They managed to squeeze onto a train packed with other desperate, injured survivors and began the long, agonizing journey home. The train ride to Nagasaki was a nightmare. Yamaguchi, wrapped in crude bandages that did little for his immense pain, was surrounded by other survivors, moaning and burnt. When he finally arrived in his hometown on August 8th, he was the shadow of his former self. He got medical attention for his severe burns, but even then, his sense of duty kicked in. After just 1 day of rest, on the morning of August 9th, heavily bandaged and barely able to stand, he reported for work. He had an urgent story to tell, a warning to deliver. He just couldn't have known that his story was only half over. Around 11 a.m., Tsutomu Yamaguchi stood in front of his supervisor at the Mitsubishi office in Nagasaki. His boss was skeptical, demanding to know what had happened in Hiroshima. As Yamaguchi recounted the unbelievable story, the single bomb, the blinding flash, the city that disappeared in a heartbeat, his boss accused him of being crazy. A single bomb couldn't destroy an entire city. The supervisor scoffed. Yamaguchi desperately tried to make him understand the sheer scale of what he'd seen. It was at that exact moment, as he was describing the first atomic blast, that the world outside the window erupted with another blinding, white-hot flash. Yamaguchi instinctively dropped to the floor, the same reflex that had saved him just 72 hours before. He later told a journalist, "I thought the mushroom cloud had followed me from Hiroshima." The second atomic bomb, Fat Man, had just detonated over Nagasaki. And once again, Tsutomu Yamaguchi was less than 2 miles from ground zero. The Nagasaki bomb was even more powerful than the one that struck Hiroshima. But this time, a few strokes of luck, The city's hilly geography and the building's reinforced concrete shielded Yamaguchi from the worst of the initial blast. He wasn't seriously injured by this second explosion, but the shockwave was strong enough to rip off his bandages, tearing his wounds open again. He stumbled through the newly destroyed streets, frantic to find his family. He found his house partially collapsed into rubble and feared the absolute worst. But in another incredible twist, his wife and son had survived. She had been out searching for burn ointment for his injuries from Hiroshima, and when the sirens blared, had taken shelter with their baby in a nearby tunnel. His first survival had, in a way, ensured their survival of the second. In the days that followed, the true horror of a double dose of radiation began. His remaining hair fell out. His wounds turned gangrenous, and he began vomiting uncontrollably. For over a week, he lay near death with a high fever. He and his family huddled in a bomb shelter when, on August 15th, Emperor Hirohito's voice came over the radio, announcing Japan's surrender. Yamaguchi was so sick, the news barely registered. Tsutomu Yamaguchi, his wife, and his son all survived. But like all hibakusha, the explosion affected people. They would carry the scars, both visible and invisible, for the rest of their lives. His wife would eventually die of kidney and liver cancer. His son, too, would face a shortened life, passing away from cancer in his 50s. Yamaguchi himself lost hearing in his left ear and battled a lifetime of radiation-related health issues. For decades, he almost never spoke of his experience, trying to process the trauma by writing poetry while he returned to his career at Mitsubishi. It wasn't until he was in his 80s that he decided it was his duty to speak out. He wrote a memoir and became a passionate advocate for nuclear disarmament. In 2006, at 90 years old, he traveled to New York to address the United Nations. Having experienced atomic bombings twice and survived, he said, "It is my destiny to talk about it." He felt a deep responsibility to make sure younger generations understood what had happened, to share his testimony as a powerful, first-hand account of the human cost of these weapons. Tsutomu Yamaguchi's journey is an incredible story of human resilience, but it's also a deeply sobering warning. His life reminds us that behind the dates and facts of history, there are real people who live with the consequences. If this story moved you, please share it. The more people who hear stories like Yamaguchi's, the better we can understand the overwhelming importance of peace. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories about the incredible people who have shaped our world. In 2009, just a year before he died, the Japanese government officially recognized Tsutomu Yamaguchi as a Niju Hibakusha, a twice-bombed person. To this day, he is the only person to ever hold this official title. While it's believed as many as 165 people may have lived through both bombings, his is the only case that was ever formally documented. He passed away from stomach cancer in 2010 at the age of 93. So was Tsutomu Yamaguchi the unluckiest man in the world, or the luckiest? In the end, he saw himself as neither. Late in his life, he came to believe he was spared for a purpose, to be a witness. His incredible survival wasn't just a fluke of chance, but a destiny he had to fulfill. As he once said, "I don't want anyone else ever to experience what I experienced." His legacy is not just one of surviving the impossible, but a powerful, lifelong plea for a world that never again has to live in the shadow of a mushroom cloud.